Glenn, we've got Matt Lynch. And Matt is running for the 14th District in Ohio, the 14th Congressional District. And Glenn, you know Melissa Bohannon. Melissa Bohannon is one of my closest friends. And when I found out that Melissa Bohannon was going to be supporting and helping with social media for Matt Lynch's campaign, Matt, when I found that out, I immediately knew a lot of things about you. Number one, I knew I knew you had some incredible character because I know what kind of a person Melissa gets involved with. And so I want to welcome you to Conover U. We've got Rodney is lost somewhere in Florida right now and can't get called in. So we've got Glenn Atkinson, one of our hosts from our Saturday show, and he's going to be joining us. So say hi, both of you.
I'm glad to join both Scott, you, and Glenn, and Melissa, who I'm sure is listening and has just been a tremendous asset to our campaign, frankly. I just barely had been on Facebook, and she turned me into a Twitter guy, so that's all good.
That's Melissa. I know exactly how lucky you are to have her. Melissa and I and have worked on many projects together.
Melissa, much like yourselves and like me and like so many others who really have joined officially, you might say, the conservative movement just in the last dozen years or so. We all come at this battle from a place of philosophy and principle, right? We believe in certain things: limited government life. We believe in the value of the Constitution. We believe in the exceptionalism of the United States of America. So these are our bedrock principles that motivate us to the fight. And that is so unlike the establishment Republican, which is the problem in the Republican Party. The establishment Republican is often just a person trying to advance in the political realm, perhaps for power, perhaps for money, perhaps for prestige, but rarely for principle. And as a result, we get the kind of leadership that we have in a Paul Ryan or over in the Senate. We get the wrong kind of people that really aren't committed to these principles. And then we wonder why they collapse in the face of any opposition from the Democrats. Because the Democrats, they believe in this stuff, a lot of them, and they fight for it. But our leadership, not so much.
So very, very true.
And I'm glad to hear you.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm glad to hear you to talk about Donald Trump in such glowing terms. I too believe that Donald Trump is performing just an incredibly important service, not just the Republican Party, but to the American people, because he is bringing to the Republican Party a kind of approach that says, hey, I'm not going to just go along to get along. I'm gonna do it my way, and doing it his way, he's pushing a lot of folks aside that are part of the establishment. And I actually believe, I've been saying this a lot recently, again, we believe in principle, right? And there are some conservatives that challenge any support for Donald Trump on the basis that, well, he's flip-flopped on different issues. But the principles that we hold so dear, the reason that we're not advancing those principles in our government is because the leadership of our own party won't fight for those principles. So the only way we're going to advance those principles is if we clear out that leadership. And so the number one question to ask of a presidential candidate, to my mind, is, are you going to be in a position, do you have the backbone, do you have the ability to sweep aside the Karl Rove, brand of leadership, the Jeb Bushes, the Paul Ryans, and reestablish conservative leadership in the Republican Party? Because if you can't do that, nothing else that you stand for really matters. And I believe absolutely that Donald Trump and Ted Cruz, they're able to do that.
I agree 100%. And being close to a few people in both campaigns, They have had numerous meetings together. They very much admire each other. And I'll tell you what I'd really like to see. And Donald Trump has never been my pick for president. Melissa and Teresa and I got in on the last 6 weeks really strong of the Ted Cruz for Senate campaign. And I've always loved Ted Cruz. I have not had any confidence at certain times over the last few years that he could win the primary because of the way it's always been ran in the past.
Sure.
And Donald Trump changed that. And if you go to Real Clear Politics and you look at that horse race over this primary season, there's only one candidate who has steadily risen, not jumped and dropped, steadily risen throughout this whole entire thing, and who has come up to second place, and that's Ted Cruz. And everybody that's Ted Cruz better be loving Donald Trump right now, because Donald Trump prepared the way for that to happen. And here's what I want to see. I'm going to get this up to Donald Trump. I want to see Donald Trump as vice president, because the vice president can go down to the Senate floor and speak. And I see turning the Senate hearings into a reality TV show with Donald Trump, the negotiator, which is what he is. What he is. I would love to see that for the next 8 years. You want to talk about whipping the house or whipping the hill?
You want to see him on the dais saying, "You're fired."
That's right. You got it. But anyways, Matt, I want to talk about you. I'm going to ask you my favorite elevator question.
No.
When you were a kid, did you want to be a doctor? Did you want to be a fireman? Or did you decide, I'm going to be a member of Congress today. I want to go into politics.
Yeah, well, it wasn't any of those, actually. My dad, certainly not a member of politics. My dad was a small practitioner lawyer. He worked in a two-lawyer office. And my dad had 9 children. And out of the 9 children, I always say 6 of them became lawyers, and the other 3 were successful. So, we grew up with this example of a guy that just helped people solve their problems and made a living at it. And that was really what drove me to go to law school. And I eventually joined my dad in practice. I was very privileged to have him actually in our office until he was 93 years old. Practicing law. So it was a wonderful thing. But my parents were always very political in the sense that they particularly my mother, she would talk to us all the time about our obligation to our fellow man, that we had to give back to society and pay attention to what was going on in our government. She was always involved, although they never ran for office or anything like that. But I often said, I grew up, I'm a boomer, right? So I grew up during the Vietnam War days when I was a teenager and in college. And I described our dinner table as not having dinner plates around the table, but lecterns, because every night my dad he liked to have all the kids sitting around, and we'd have these debates about, at the time was things about the Vietnam War and the Red Chinese threat and things of that nature. But I remember the Goldwater campaign, and actually you see much of they're dragging out Barry Goldwater to slap Donald Trump with them now. So I have always been very interested in politics, but didn't really get involved at all until 10 years ago, when one night I was throwing my shoes at Bill O'Reilly on the television, and my wife, who had seen my frustration many times, she said, "Well, why don't you get off the couch and do something?" And, what am I going to do? One guy, I'm a small country lawyer, what am I going to do? But I ended up running for township trustee, and 4 years later I'm in the state legislature, and here I'm running for Congress. Never expected to be here. And I can guarantee you that a bunch of Republicans in the state of Ohio wish I wasn't here. but we're pushing the conservative message all over Northeast Ohio, in fact, for that matter, all over the state, and extremely well received by the voters who are fed up with the direction of our government and the cowardice, frankly, of the Republican Party leadership.
Well, and I'm glad you said fed up, because before you called in, Glenn and I when we started the show, we were discussing the tipping point. And I've been saying over the last 3 years, at some place in here, there's got to be the tipping point, and most likely history will bear out where that was. But there's a lot of things really going on that control that tipping point. One of our problems we've got is we have such a high, wonderful standard of living in this great country we've got. Even when we're in financial straits, and we are basically right now, jobs are nowhere in most places. You still got a good feeling from most people. People are still packing the mall and packing Walmart. But you've got these people that are getting these letters home. And Rodney Conover used this when he ran for Congress. I got that letter that said I really wasn't happy with my health insurance. And over the last couple of years especially, a lot of people have had to change their health insurance. A lot of people are at night sitting down with their children and not understanding what they're doing in math at school. It's very disconcerting to a lot of parents. I think, and I always said, 7 years ago, I said, Obama, if he runs this all the way to the left, is going to pull the pendulum so far that when it lets go, it's going to knock the left back into the closet for 20 years. And I don't know that, Europe's on its way back. They've already been down this road and on its way back. I don't know that the American people, Matt, are you feeling that in Ohio? Are you feeling a real change from the past? And you've ran campaigns in the past of their passion, about their understanding. One more illustration, I'll hand it back to you to comment on that. We use this illustration on almost every show. When I was in California, I looked across the street and I saw cows and wild turkeys in a mountain and a river, in a meadow. In Texas, when we moved, now when I look out the window, I see a bunch of houses. We moved into a neighborhood. And I think about 100 of those houses, Matt, and if I walked into 100 of those houses and had a conversation about basic principles of life, I would say probably 80% of those people would agree with me. But if I walked into that same group of houses and asked them what Benghazi was, I would imagine most of them don't know. They'd say, well, I don't know, an Italian dessert. But I think that's changing. I think people are starting to watch the news. I think people are starting to pay attention to what's going on. We know there is a huge influx of people involved in this presidential primary season that we don't generally have. How is that translating? As you're out with all the people and you're having meetings and all kinds of stuff, how are you feeling that?
Well, I think you're certainly right that we have to some extent reached a tipping point, although, it's a very gradual thing that people, some people jump in and have been involved, since 2007, 2008. Others are just now getting involved. But, when you look at the different issues that Obama has addressed and pushed, and you mentioned the healthcare issue, of course, being so prominent. What's happened, what I've seen happen is really a growth and understanding of the people, because if you talk to those people in those 100 houses, and at least if you talk to those that are Republicans, and you say to them, well, what does the Republican Party stand for? And if they're not really engaged, they'll say, well, the Republican Party stands for small government. It stands for lower taxes. It stands for individual liberty. But those people are now learning that although those words are used by a lot of Republicans, that many of them actually will not stand up and fight for those values. And that's where I think you're really seeing a real edge develop on the conservative base. The conservative base is no longer willing to accept that they have to hold their nose and vote for the lesser of two issues. I've said this many times. I've been voting for the lesser of two issues in my lifetime for 40 years. And I would like to have an opportunity to vote for the good. And people, they are no longer willing to accept that somehow the political process is so rigged that they actually can't have the good, that is the conservative candidate. And your discussion about Trump and Cruz is a very insightful one, because Ronald Reagan, he's my hero, but he made a huge mistake when he handed the Republican Party back over to the Bush family as he left. And the Cruz or Cruz-Trump ticket offers an opportunity for 16 years of conservative control of the Republican Party. And that is probably the most important thing that can come out of the 2016 presidential election.
Exactly.
But,
exactly.
But presidential election.
Exactly.